Part 1, The Mirror and the Abyss, A Man's Solitude versus Her Validation Game. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Carl Jung. There is a silent war that no one tells men about. It is not fought with weapons, nor declared with banners. It is waged in the private corners of your mind, in the spaces where your masculinity seeks meaning, and your heart seeks validation. Carl Jung didn't just whisper the truth about the psyche. He exposed its battlefield. And nowhere is this battlefield more treacherous than where the masculine confronts the feminine. You were taught that love is sacred. That giving is noble. That sacrificing for her happiness is the summit of virtue. But what if I told you, the very act of seeking her validation is the slow suicide of your masculine soul? Welcome to the abyss. In today's world, the modern man is like a lion raised in a zoo. Tamed. Shaved. Fed at 7 p.m. sharp. And told that this is life. That this is love. That this is happiness. He doesn't hunt. He performs. And she claps. But only if he dances the right dance. Carl Jung warned us about this, about anima possession. When a man's identity becomes entangled with the projected feminine, he loses his edge. He becomes reactive, emotionally dependent. His value is no longer forged in solitude, but measured in the mirror of her eyes. If she smiles, he feels worthy. If she withholds, he collapses. This is the manipulation. Not through overt control, but through emotional supply. The validation game is ancient, but Tinder turned it into an empire. Epicurus taught that peace comes from simplicity and self-control. But what simplicity remains in a man whose nervous system is hijacked by dopamine hits every time a woman matches him, texts him, or hearts his story? She doesn't need to manipulate you directly. Your need for her validation is already the leash. And here's the bitter irony, the more you seek it, the less she gives it. Because in the theater of dating, performance kills polarity. Masculine energy is meant to lead, not please. It's supposed to remain rooted in solitude, not dance for social rewards. But solitude is now framed as loneliness. A disease. A curse. And she is painted as the cure. This is how the culture traps men. Performance in exchange for attention. Compliance in exchange for touch. Sacrifice in exchange for presence. You may think you're being noble, but what you are is empty. Jung understood the danger of this psychic inflation, when a man gives the feminine power she did not earn. She becomes the gatekeeper to his joy. Not because she deserves that role, but because he abandoned himself. This is not love. This is worship of the other. Nietzsche said, "He who despises himself still respects himself as one who despises." That's the twisted loop many men live in. They secretly hate their weakness, but cover it in romanticism. It is not romantic to need her. It is not noble to shrink yourself to keep her. It is not love to erase your silence just to hear her applause. And yet you were taught otherwise. This is where manipulation thrives, in the fog between your wounds and her smile. In the spaces where you don't even know who you are anymore, unless she tells you. But here's the darkest truth of all. She respects your solitude more than your sacrifice. She feels safer with a man who doesn't need her light to burn. Because only that man cannot be controlled. You think she left because you weren't enough. No, she left because you needed her to feel enough. Masculinity is not found in conquest, but in containment. Can you contain your desire without acting on it? Can you contain her emotions without absorbing them? Can you contain your loneliness without seeking her to fix it? These are not questions for the dating apps. These are questions for your soul. And until you sit with them, in that brutal cave of silence, you are still a boy begging for love, not a man standing in truth. Don't be fooled by the validation game. It is not love. It is a leash. And the man who cannot walk alone will always crawl for approval. Part 2, The Mother, the Muse, and the Manipulator, Jung's Archetypes Re-Examined. Every man carries within him the eternal image of woman. Carl Jung. There is an image of woman that lives in every man. It does not come from her voice, her touch, or her body. It comes from you. From the oldest layers of your psyche. From the unconscious. Jung called it the anima, a psychic imprint of the feminine, burned into the soul of man like an ancient watermark. And when a man has not made peace with his anima, he projects her onto every woman he desires. He turns women into myths, and himself into a servant of illusion. This is not romance. This is enslavement. Most men do not fall in love with real women. They fall in love with their anima projection, and confuse the two. The smile she gives becomes divine. Her silence becomes sacred. Her body becomes salvation. And because of this, he does not see her as she is, but as who he needs her to be. The mother. The muse. The manipulator. But none of these are real. They are figments. Shadows cast by his own unmet needs. Jung never intended for the anima to be worshipped. He meant for it to be integrated, absorbed into the masculine psyche as a balancing force. But in the modern world, where solitude is vilified and emotional hunger is monetized, the anima has mutated into a trap. A loop of validation, rejection, performance, and collapse. And so the modern man kneels. Not in reverence to truth, but in addiction to fantasy. He looks at her and sees the mother. The woman who will soothe his wounds, calm his storms, give him the emotional home he never built for himself. She is warmth. She is peace. But underneath this softness is a quiet manipulation. She becomes the reward for compliance. If he pleases, she smiles. If he disobeys, she withholds. This isn't explicit. It doesn't need to be. Because a man still ruled by the inner child will willingly betray himself for the warmth he once knew at her breast. This is the regression, from man to boy, from sovereign to servant. But it doesn't end there. Soon, she becomes the muse. He builds his empire not from purpose, but for her gaze. He sculpts his body for her eyes. He chases status not to lead, but to attract. She becomes the reason he wakes, lifts, writes, climbs. She becomes the justification for his evolution. And yet in that very moment, his growth is no longer sovereign. It's outsourced. Delegated. Dependent on her reaction. This is not love. This is performance in drag. And the muse becomes a mirror, reflecting not the truth of who he is, but the echo of who she allows him to be. Nietzsche said, "Become who you are." But how can a man become who he is when his becoming depends on the approval of a gaze that is not his own? Eventually, the image fractures. The illusion breaks. She reveals her full face, not as mother, not as muse, but as manipulator. Not because she is evil, but because he is unconscious. Unconscious men give women power they never asked for. And some women, conditioned by attention, trained by modern dating, learn to wield it. She doesn't need to scream. She doesn't need to control. She simply exists, while he dances. It's not even that she wants to manipulate. Often, she doesn't know she is. But when a man is starved for meaning, when he's never sat in the silence of his own psyche, when he's never faced his anima and said, "You are me, not her," he becomes ripe for domination. She becomes the funnel through which his self-worth flows. And the more he needs her, the more he dies. You think she betrayed you? No. You betrayed yourself the moment you made her your source. The moment you handed her the keys to your peace. The moment you projected divinity where there was only humanity. Jung did not teach us to hate women. He taught us to see them. Not as fantasies, but as beings, flawed, real, sovereign. And to do that, you must first reclaim the part of you that turned them into gods. Your anima is not meant to be projected. She is meant to be faced, confronted, held, owned. You must go inward, not to kill the feminine within, but to make peace with her, to free her from the chains of projection. Because as long as she rules from the shadows, every woman you meet will be a pawn in a story you don't even know you're writing. And so you ask, what's the way out? Not detachment. Not hatred. Not going monk. But integration. Let the feminine inside you be felt, but not obeyed. Let her guide your empathy, but not govern your decisions. Let her shape your poetry, but never your purpose. Because only the man who has integrated his anima can love a woman without needing her. Only he can see her, not as salvation, not as saboteur, but as sovereign. Equal. Real. And until that happens, you will keep attracting the same face, the same story, the same heartbreak, again and again. Not because women are manipulative, but because you are still dreaming. And the man who refuses to wake up, will always mistake the dream for love. Part 3, Why the Feminine Fears the Solitary Man, Masculinity Without Performance. There is a certain kind of man the world no longer understands. He walks without noise, speaks without performance, and loves without needing applause. He is not driven by likes, validation, or conquest. He is not shaped by the temperature of the crowd or the desire of a woman. He is dangerous, not because he is violent, but because he is untouchable. This is the solitary man. And in a world addicted to attention, he is a heretic. Masculinity without performance terrifies the feminine, not because it threatens her directly, but because it shatters the emotional economy she was taught to rely on. The economy where she rewards behavior with presence, where her affection becomes a tool of control, and where men compete in exchange for attention. But when a man does not need the prize, the game collapses. Carl Jung spoke often of individuation, the path of becoming whole. Not liked. Not popular. But whole. The solitary man is the one who walked that path, not away from women, but through the fire of projection. He no longer sees the feminine as cure. He no longer craves her as mirror. He has met his anima in the abyss and walked back alive. And now, he sees her clearly, not as a mother, muse, or manipulator, but simply as woman. This kind of clarity strips away her power to control. Because now, he cannot be baited. Not with sex. Not with drama. Not with the illusion of potential. He has tasted solitude, and it did not kill him. It crowned him. In the modern world, solitude is pathologized. If a man is alone, he is assumed to be broken. A loser. A failure. Dating culture celebrates the abundance mindset, which, in reality, is just a desperate attempt to avoid sitting with your own silence. The masculine, in its raw form, is stillness. A gravitational center. But apps, influencers, and even modern relationships teach the opposite, that if you're not performing, you're decaying. And women? They've been trained to respond to noise, not depth. To stimulation, not substance. A man who is still becomes threatening. Because he cannot be played. She asks him to chase. He does not. She withholds affection. He does not react. She creates tension. He does not flinch. Because his validation comes from the void, not from her. Epicurus wrote that the highest pleasure is the absence of pain. But modern men don't believe that. They chase pleasure like a drug. They scroll. Swipe. Flirt. Perform. They mistake stimulation for love, attention for intimacy, and validation for worth. This is not masculinity. This is addiction in a tuxedo. And women feel it. They don't respect the man who begs. They may use him. They may tolerate him. But in the deepest parts of their nature, they cannot surrender to a man who lives on his knees. The solitary man, on the other hand, evokes something ancient. Something primal. Not because he dominates, but because he doesn't chase. His presence is a mirror. It reflects her chaos, not with judgment, but with quiet solidity. And she either rises, or runs. This is why the feminine often fears the man she can't move. He reminds her of her own internal disorder. He reflects her games without engaging. And in that moment, she is faced with herself, raw, unmasked, undone. And yet, she is drawn to him. Not by lust, but by polarity. Because deep down, the feminine doesn't want to lead. She wants to be held. She doesn't want to control. She wants to be able to relax, and only the man who is rooted in his own solitude gives her that freedom. But here lies the paradox. She tests the man she respects, to make sure he's real. She pushes against the wall, to feel its strength. She creates emotional storms, to see if he can anchor her. And the weak man mistakes this for rejection. He collapses. The solitary man. He does not move. He remains. And in that stillness, she realizes, he doesn't need me to feel whole. That is both terrifying, and irresistible. But here's the cost of that power, it is forged in fire. You don't become that man through books, tactics, or videos. You become him by dying. Dying to performance. Dying to people-pleasing. Dying to the little boy inside you who begs for applause. You have to sit in the desert of your own soul, and not run. You have to let the silence strip you bare. You have to face the truth that no one is coming to save you, not your mother, not your ex, not the right one. Only then can you emerge with gravity. And only gravity commands respect. So if you are alone right now, good. If no woman texts you, good. If you're unseen, unwanted, unchosen, good. Because that silence you're feeling. That's not rejection. That's the beginning of your throne. And when you rise from it, rooted, still, whole, you will no longer ask, how do I attract her? You will ask, does she belong in the world I've built? Part 4, When Masculinity Becomes Sacrifice, the Weaponization of the Virtuous Man. The most dangerous lie a man will ever believe is that his value is in his usefulness. From childhood, he is groomed to serve. Applauded when he suppresses himself. Rewarded when he sacrifices. Told that to love is to give endlessly, and that to be good is to disappear. And so he obeys. He holds doors. Pays bills. Listens deeply. Sacrifices sleep, energy, time, dreams, until there is nothing left of him but performance. He has become the virtuous man. But this virtue is hollow. It was never his. It was demanded. And she, the woman he serves, does not love him more for it. She respects him less. Because sacrifice, when given as currency for validation, is no longer noble. It is a transaction. And no woman desires a man who trades his soul for affection. Carl Jung warned, every form of addiction is bad, no matter whether the narcotic be alcohol, morphine or idealism. Idealism, that's the unspoken drug of the modern man. He becomes addicted to being seen as good. To being the better man. To being chosen not because he is sovereign, but because he is safe. And so his masculinity becomes sanitized. Tamed. Useful. He's told, real men do the work. Real men show up. Real men make her feel safe. And yet, no one tells him the cost. That in this endless cycle of proving, the more he gives, the less he's desired. Because she doesn't want his virtue. She wants his depth. And depth cannot be accessed by a man who is constantly contorting himself to be accepted. This is the weaponization of the good man. She says, be vulnerable. So he opens his heart. She says, communicate more. So he shares. She says, prioritize my needs. So he does. But none of this brings her closer. Because it was never about his openness. It was about power, who bends, who leads, who holds the frame. And when he bends too far, she breaks the contract. She loses attraction. Not because he failed to give, but because he gave himself away. This is where Jung's insights cut deep. When a man does not integrate his shadow, the raw, primal, unapologetic part of him, his light becomes performative. He becomes good because he is terrified of being rejected. Terrified of being alone. Terrified of being misunderstood. And in that terror, he becomes a puppet, not a partner. Nietzsche saw this long ago. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, he writes, "Beware of those who offer great sacrifices. For they may demand the same of you in return." And isn't that the truth? How many men today resent women, not because women are cruel, but because he gave what was never asked and now demands gratitude for a gift she never wanted? This is not masculinity. This is martyrdom. And no one is inspired by a martyr, they are pitted, at best, and discarded, at worst. The modern dating world is a crucible for this disillusionment. Men perform virtue to attract. Women test for strength beneath the performance. And when they find only appeasement, they withdraw. He spirals. He says, "I did everything right. I treated her like a queen." But he forgets, no queen desires a servant. She desires a king, one who does not need her love to define himself. Virtue without power is mockery. And power without roots is manipulation. So the question is not, how do I become more selfless? The real question is, am I giving from wholeness, or begging for worth? A man who bleeds to be seen is not brave, he is bleeding for applause. And applause will never fill the abyss of an unlived soul. There is a brutal moment in every man's life, the moment when he realizes his goodness was never love, only survival. The moment he sees that his efforts were currency, and that he sold himself cheap. That's when the fire begins. When he stops performing. When he stops giving what is not respected. When he stops breaking himself to earn the approval of those who fear his strength. He retreats. Not to hide. But to reclaim. He goes inward. Not to collapse. But to rise. Because real masculinity is not sacrifice for its own sake, it is discernment. It is knowing who is worthy of your energy. It is protecting your time like gold. It is walking away, not with bitterness, but with clarity. And when a man steps fully into that power, he no longer says, "I'll do anything for her." He says, "Only the worthy are allowed near the fire." So if you are in pain right now, if you've given everything and feel emptier than ever, good. You are being broken open. And in that opening, something ancient stirs. The wild, unshakable truth of your masculinity. Not built on sacrifice, but on sovereignty. Part 5, Love as Illusion, How the Anima Hijacks Modern Relationships. The greatest trick ever played on the modern man wasn't done by society, women, or culture. It was done by his own psyche. By the part of him Jung called the anima, the inner woman, the archetypal feminine that lives inside his unconscious mind. She wears the mask of love. She whispers that salvation lies in her eyes. And if you listen closely, she always sounds like the one that got away. To understand modern manipulation, we must first understand projection. Because man does not fall in love with a woman, he falls in love with the image within himself that he puts onto her. Jung knew this. He wrote, "Every man carries within him the eternal image of woman. This image is fundamentally unconscious, a hereditary factor of primordial origin. In other words, she is not her. She is you. You created her. You crowned her. You gave her power. And now you suffer under your own illusion. This is why the modern man falls for women who are emotionally unavailable, erratic, or even cruel, because those traits match the wounded feminine inside himself. Not because she is soulmate material, but because she triggers unresolved wounds he mistook for love. She becomes the muse, the fire, the cure, and the poison. In today's dating world, this unconscious dynamic is exploited. Apps like Tinder don't just sell you bodies. They sell you back your own projections. Every swipe is a flirtation with the anima, not the woman herself. You're not searching for a partner. You're chasing your reflection in high heels. You mistake chemistry for compatibility. You call chaos passion. You label addiction as love. This is not connection. This is psychic possession. And the feminine, the real one, she feels this. When a man loves her for who she reminds him of, his mother, his ex, his fantasy, she senses it. She may accept the attention. She may enjoy the worship. But she will never surrender to it. Because deep down, she knows, he doesn't see me. He sees what he wants me to be. This dynamic creates the core manipulation of modern relationships. The more he chases the illusion, the more she controls the reality. Carl Jung warned, as long as the anima is not integrated, she will possess the man and appear in projection. This is why modern men tolerate behavior they would never accept from a brother or friend. They excuse red flags. They justify disrespect. They chase ghosts in lipstick. Not because she is powerful, but because he is blind. So how do you escape? Not by hating women. Not by swearing off love. But by owning your own illusion. You must meet the anima within, not in her body, but in your mind. Sit with her in silence. Ask her, what do you want from me? And she will answer, not with words, but with ache. You'll feel the longing you once mistook for love. You'll face the stories you've told yourself, the fairy tales, the fantasies, the movies where the broken boy is saved by the perfect girl. You'll realize, you never loved her, you loved the part of yourself you weren't ready to claim. Nietzsche said it sharply. There is always some madness in love. But there is also always some reason in madness. You must find that reason. You must see where your wounds built altars to women who never deserved your sacrifice. You must dismantle the temples of fantasy, and build instead a throne of clarity. Because only when you reclaim your projection can you meet a woman as she is, not as your savior, but as a sovereign soul. This is the painful freedom of masculine awakening. You will lose the highs of illusion. You will stop chasing women who don't respect you. You will stop confusing anxiety with love. And you will stop giving your soul to someone just because they remind you of a dream. And what's left? Reality. Raw. Clear. Undeniable. Not romantic, but real. And in that reality, a different kind of love becomes possible. Not love as dependency. Not love as salvation. But love as recognition. You, whole. Her, whole. Nothing missing. Nothing needing to be filled. So when a man says, I can't stop thinking about her, I say, it's not her you miss. It's the illusion she represented. Let her go. Let the anima speak. And then, let her die. So that you may finally live. Not in fantasy. But in freedom. Part 6, The Masculine Reclaimed, Fire Without Permission. At the end of every myth, the hero returns from the underworld. But he does not return as he left. He is no longer soft, no longer seeking. He no longer begs to be seen. He becomes what the world fears most. A man who burns without permission. The modern masculine journey is not about conquering women. It is not about becoming more attractive, more wanted, more chosen. It is about incinerating every lie that told you your worth was earned through performance. That you had to be safe. That you had to earn her love. That you had to soften your fire to be accepted. No. That fire was never meant to be tamed. It was meant to transform you. The final truth is brutal. Most men were never rejected by women, they were rejected by a system that feared their masculine soul. From birth, you were medicated, distracted, guilt. Taught to avoid aggression. Taught to fear solitude. Taught that to be good was to be agreeable, digestible, passive. And worst of all, you were taught that your fire was dangerous unless approved by someone else, your teacher, your boss, your girlfriend, your wife. So you learned to hide it. To be sweet. To be useful. To be polite. But every time you swallowed your truth, you betrayed something ancient. Carl Jung knew this betrayal. He called it the loss of the archetype. The disappearance of masculine kings, warriors, sages. Replaced by clowns. Entertainers. Overgrown boys with six-packs and no spine. You see them now. Posing on dating apps. Begging for text backs. Masking desperation as emotional intelligence. This isn't evolution. It's extinction. But fire never dies. It only waits. It waits in the man who feels disgusted with himself after another failed attempt to impress. It waits in the man who wakes up in a woman's bed and feels emptier than before. It waits in the man who walks alone at midnight, fists clenched, whispering to himself, there has to be more than this. There is. But it requires a death. The death of the nice guy. The death of the supplicant. The death of the man who lowers his voice and dulls his soul to be liked. You must bury him. Not with shame, but with honor. He tried. He served. He survived. But now, he must be left behind. Because the world does not need another domesticated male. The world needs a dangerous man with discipline. A man who speaks the truth, not to provoke, but because he refuses to live in lies. A man who no longer asks for permission to exist. You may lose people. You may terrify women who only wanted you soft. You may offend friends who preferred you broken. Good. Let your fire burn every false attachment. Because the masculine doesn't exist to please. It exists to penetrate illusion. To stand. To see. To protect. To lead. But you cannot lead others until you have led yourself out of hell. Love will come, not as a rescue mission, but as a reflection. From a woman who sees your strength and doesn't flinch. Who doesn't try to tame you. Who dares to meet you, not in fantasy, but in truth. But even if she never comes. Even if the path remains lonely. Even if no one ever understands what you carry. You are still enough. Because the fire inside you is not a tool. It is not a product. It is not a means to be chosen. It is your birthright. It is your core. It is the divine masculine, resurrected. So stop chasing. Stop performing. Stop bleeding for attention. Reclaim your silence. Reclaim your solitude. Reclaim the parts of you that were shamed into sleep. Stand up. Speak clearly. Burn cleanly. And let the world adjust to your heat. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Carl Jung. You owe no one your fire. But you owe it to yourself to never extinguish it again.